Hello, and welcome back to Amber Black Chats. We are in our Redemptive Grace series. We are on episode 6, which is called Daddy Issues, which is probably the hardest chapter in my book, Redemptive Grace. Hardest chapter to write, and we're about to find out if it's going to be the hardest one to speak about. So we're going to find out right now. So thank you for being here. We're going to kick off our time in God's Word with Colossians 3:23, which is a strong verse. I've used it multiple times throughout my book because it is definitely a verse that impacted my upbringing. And it says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." I think this is a loaded verse to be such a small verse, because for me, the way I'm wired, and some of the things that shaped me growing up, is I very much could flip those and say, whatever you do, work heartily for men and then for the Lord, because my approval was that I was seeking was not, was not seeking God's approval. For such a long time in my life, I was seeking the approval of other people. And one of those people was my daddy. So I want to give like a disclaimer first, in sharing this part, because I would imagine this is probably the most controversial chapter in the book Redemptive Grace. Because I'm talking about my family. I'm talking about like private, like my personal life. And my daddy is not alive to defend himself. He passed away several years ago and is in heaven, I believe. However, I really prayed through writing this down, because from the times I've mentored ladies, and spent time with young ladies, a lot of them are dealing with these same kind of struggles and issues. So I just wanted to validate that with them. Before this book was published, I had my siblings read it and ask, for their permission. And if there was anything they wanted me to change or take out, that I would, because it really, my story obviously mirrors a lot of the story of my brothers and my sister. And I wanted to take care of that. So this one is also challenging to just talk about and to remember. But I think there's a beautiful message of redemptive grace at the end. And I think that there is always hope in God's word, and in being a believer, like following Jesus, that hope is something he always gives us. And so my hope and what I believe, and I hope what I believe works out, is that one day I'll see my daddy again in heaven, and that all this stuff that I'm getting ready to unpack won't matter when we see each other. But what I do hope is that hearing the way that my daddy and I handled our relationship would offer encouragement to people who are listening. Whatever that looks like. It might look like forgiveness or mercy or grace. It might look like boundaries. Your story. I don't know your story, but I'm hoping that you will glean some hope and encouragement from this. So, as I've said many times, I'm the oldest of 4 children. I loved my life growing up. I loved being a big sister. I loved the fun that we had together. And I'm really, especially now as an adult and as a parent, on a different level, I'm so grateful for the parents that I had growing up. Both of my parents loved Jesus. Both my parents were very hardworking, very, very hardworking, and were so hospitable. Um, we did not grow up in a big house. We did not grow up with fancy things, but whatever we had, we shared with others. My parents were really big believers in helping people, in providing a safe place in our home. I remember being young and having a lot of the youth group. These would have been like big kids, because I was a little kid, would come over to our house, and my daddy would play basketball with them, and mama would cook for them. And I remember late nights where my siblings and I would go to bed and my parents would stay up, listening to teenagers. And my daddy, he would sometimes bring home people from his jobs that were having hard times, and my mama would always make sure that they left with food in their belly. And if they needed anything that we could give them, she would do that. They're just so hospitable, and they ingrained that in all four of us. I think all four of us really have taken those qualities of working hard and loving people very seriously and incorporated into our lives. My mama always worked really hard. When we were little, like I mentioned before, she worked in the church school, the private school that we attended so that we could go, and it helped with the cost of tuition because it was expensive to do private school, and she worked really hard. Then my mama decided she wanted to go back and get her degree, which I think is very brave and very strong. And she she went back to school. What was really funny is she started back to college, and I started middle school the same time. And I went from a private church school where there were 18 kids in my class, and they were the same 18 kids pretty much. I mean, like a little bit of changeover, but basically the same kids. And then went to public middle school and there was only like one kindergarten, one first grade, one second grade, and then going to public middle school where there were like 6 different sixth grade classes. I'm like, what in heaven's name is going on here? So a bit of a culture shock to go from a bubble to like, bam, so many people. But I had friends that from church that were in that middle school, and one of my friends' mama was one of my sixth grade teachers, and she was wonderful. So it was a great transition. And honestly, I don't think I would have survived. I could not have met the expectations to have stayed in that private school environment. I would have, just knowing me and knowing the sin issues I was already dealing with, my goodness, I would have collapsed trying to perform all the time at that school. So I think it's a blessing that I was transferred to public school in middle school. Made a lot of friends there. Middle school is the worst, but I have a lot of good memories and a lot of fun things that happened in middle school. So that would have put me in middle school, and then my siblings all at an elementary school. And so my mama worked at that elementary school and then went to school at night. So oftentimes it was a matter of her working with kids all day and then taking us home, getting us settled, and then going to school. My grandmama lived across the road and helped take care of us. And then the older I got, the more responsibilities I had. But I truly treasure that time in life. It's some of my favorite memories are during that season of life where I was getting to chauffeur my siblings around. We just had so much fun, and it was ridiculous and silly. But man, it just meant a lot to my heart. But yeah, my mama worked really, really hard, and my daddy did too. I can't remember a time where he wasn't working 2 jobs and sometimes 3 jobs. When my youngest brother was born, he was born with some health issues, and so like medical bills were really expensive, and then just life was expensive. Having kids is expensive, paying a house payment's expensive, and my parents worked really, really hard. Um, to take care of everything and to not go the debt path, and they modeled that for us. And um yeah, and my parents also taught us not to see people through their economic status or the color of their skin or how old they were. Our parents made sure we were exposed to all kinds of people. All kinds of people came into our home. We went and visited and spent time with people. So I think that they just did such a great job in building us into like really well-rounded young people, and I'm really excited about that. My mom was very frugal, very resourceful. Her love language is gift giving, and she had a closet that was her gift closet. And when she would see something on clearance or had coupons for or whatever, she would get it then, and just always took such good care of people, and just really loved people really, really well. So I am so grateful for my mama and my daddy and these qualities that they instilled in me, and that I can see in my life, and that I'm trying to pass on to my children, and I can see that in my siblings and their children as well. So my parents were parents that were disciplinarians. They were, we had high standards, high expectations. We were expected to keep our rooms clean, to help with the housework and the yard work. We were taught, we're all living in this house and it's kind of like a team sport. Everyone is responsible for helping the team succeed. So we were taught to work hard from a young age. Our grades mattered. The way we treated people mattered. Manners were a really big thing. Um, we would memorize Bible verses, and the biggest thing was like for my mama was like when we would go out, like we're representing our family name. So when we're in the community, our behavior is speaking to our family name. And we had a lot of fun, and we did have a lot of rules, and it was strict, but my goodness, even in that, we had so much fun. And like we didn't have a lot growing up, but my mama always made sure like our birthdays were really special. And so and Christmas was always really special. So they, like, knowing now what I know as a parent and knowing what the economy was like when we were growing up in the 80s, like they worked really hard to provide for us and give us like sweet memories and sweet moments. So I felt like, from my perspective growing up, my mama was like, she had high expectations for me, but there was like a lot of grace too, and a lot of like, um, she could see me working hard and she would acknowledge when she see me working hard. Whereas with my daddy, if something was a B, he would be like, why wasn't it an A? And what can you do to make it an A? Like if there was a solo and chorus, did I audition for that solo, and why didn't I get the longer solo or whatever? And so I just really had this deep desire, and I think most girls do, for my daddy to be proud of me. I kind of always felt my mama was proud of me because she would always give me, like, the way she did things was like, if you put in the work and you proved that you were responsible, there were rewards that went with that. So if I was responsible, then I could go to the movies. If I, made sure the house was clean, then I could go to a friend's house. Like, so she just gave me more opportunities to grow in responsibility and rewarded me. Whereas I've always kind of felt like daddy was like, I just kept working to get him to say he was proud of me, to say that he loved me was a thing. And then I have to remember there's a lot of grace that we need to give to the generations that came before us. We live in a time now, everybody's like touchy feely and stuff. And, like my grandmama grew up in the Depression. So she wasn't, she was like a workhorse. And so she wasn't like lovey dovey with my mama, and, there needs to be a lot of grace given to the way culture and society was before we grew up, because our parents didn't grow up like us. Their parents didn't grow up like them. So I just feel like there needs to be a lot of understanding and grace giving just how different the life, the family structure looked as people grew up. So even though there were a lot of responsibilities and a lot of expectations, I do have so many good memories. I have more good memories than negative memories of my childhood and those years. And like my favorite memory with my daddy was, my birthday's in February. And one time he picked me up from school. I think it was my 10th birthday. And he took me to this fancy ice cream shop, just the two of us, and took me out of school. That was like such a big deal. Like I skipped school on my birthday to go get ice cream, and I still remember it. And I wish that ice cream shop still existed, because I would probably like go back every year for my birthday. And maybe it's good that it doesn't exist, because I'd be in trouble, because I really love ice cream. I remember my daddy playing basketball. He loved basketball. He loved the Carolina Tar Heels. He would teach us how to play in the driveway. Taught me how to shoot 3-pointers, and I loved playing basketball. It was so much fun. But I'm not competitive, so that wouldn't have really worked out real well, but I loved learning and it was fun. Daddy had a beautiful, beautiful singing voice, a really rich baritone voice, and he could sing tenor if he needed to. And just, he was the guy that when he sang, he was like a storyteller. So he would sing these songs that would like paint these pictures, and you could see them in your mind. And he would sing with like passion and, I don't know, just this, like when he's singing it, like you're believing everything he's saying. And I just thought, like, I just loved hearing him sing. And he would be asked to sing at homecomings and weddings and funerals. And I remember we had a sweet lady we went to church with, her husband passed away, and often I would always travel with daddy when he would sing at other churches and things, but when I was little, I didn't sing with him. And I remember I was in high school, and this lady's husband had passed away, and she asked daddy to sing, and he asked me to sing as well at that funeral. And I felt like that moment is like I had made it in my daddy's eyes. Like I was good enough and talented enough that he wanted me on the stage with him. Really impacted me. And like, I'd finally done something that was good enough, and he was like celebrating it and showcasing me, right? And I felt really, really great about that. um some families are like very affectionate, like physically affectionate and lovey-dovey, and like growing up we showed each other love by doing what we said we were going to do, or by doing something special. Like there are certain things I would always get mama and daddy for their birthdays. And that was like this is me saying I love you. And like my grandmama was that way. I don't really remember ever saying she loved me, but every birthday I had a carrot cake, which was my favorite. And that's all I needed, because that's what I knew, like I knew I was loved by her. When I went through the all the sexual sin that I was dealing with, and felt the need to confess it to my parents and to ask for forgiveness. My mama was heartbroken, but she was very forgiving. And, her thing was that like I had, broken their trust. I'd have to earn that trust back. But she was so forgiving in that process, and very loving through that process. And unfortunately, I feel like that was the first like fracture in the relationship between me and my daddy. Like he just didn't treat me the same after that. And, he needed to process what he needed to process. And um, he was really angry with me and disappointed in me. And yeah, and so that would come up. He would work that into conversations sometime, and uh, it made it kind of hard to heal, and hard for me to feel forgiven by God, because my model for fatherhood was my daddy, and he hadn't forgiven me. And so it was a conflicting thing in my head and my heart. Um, when I got married and moved away, again, like this was a time before cell phones and computers and things like that. So you had to have money to get a calling card to make a long distance phone call. We lived in a different time zone, so you'd have to work out availability. So I just spoke with my daddy less and less. He worked long hours, and worked a lot, and wasn't really available to talk to. And so I talked to my mama and my siblings a lot, but not really to my daddy. I would get to see him a little bit when the different places I lived. He would, before my siblings could drive, he would meet me halfway for me to pick them up, and they'd come and stay with me for Thanksgiving, and then they'd stay with me for part of the summer. Um, and so I get to see him then, and it'd be like fine, but it'd be kind of like superficial kind of things. Um, so I was married to a fella who was in the Navy, and sometimes when he would go on deployment, especially before I had children, I would come home when he was on deployment, and I would stay at my grandmama's house across the street from where I grew up, because our house that we grew up in, someone was always sharing a bedroom. So when I moved out, every sibling had their own bedroom, and so grandmama had a guest room, and I would stay in her room but still hang out with my siblings, and it was lovely. And we had a good time. And I would go with my sister to her church, and we were in a Bible study, and we had noticed some changes in our daddy. And as we were going through this Bible study series, we were picking up like, oh my gosh, this thing that they're talking about in this Bible study, this sounds like our daddy. And we talked about it, we'd pray about it. I'm not confrontational. My sister can be if she needs to be, but that's our dad. So we wanted to be appropriate in these concerns that we had. And so we decided that, that we would have a conversation with him um, before my sister would go away to college, and before I would. This was like over the summer, so before she'd go back to college, before I'd go back to wherever I was living. And I just want to be really clear that I don't think my daddy is a villain, or a bad person, but I do think that he was dealing with major struggles and did not receive the help that he needed to deal with those struggles. And so when that happened, he basically became like a different person. My daddy was always fun and charismatic, and people were always at our house. And when I started coming home as an adult to visit, I would see these changes in him. And we ended up having a conversation. I asked him about this thing, and he took it as an attack. And I was very gentle in my delivery, but I'm thinking now as a parent, like if my kids came to me and said something like what I said to my dad, I probably been like, what the heck, and lose my junk. But it was a terrible conversation. He yelled at me, and I was crying and all that kind of stuff. And it just put another wedge in our relationship. And just through the next couple of years, like I just kept seeing these major changes in my daddy and how he behaved and how he spoke to people, and who he would hang out with and when he wouldn't hang out with. And it was like Sunday morning when he was a performance, which is what I struggled with, is like being one person on Sunday and being secret the rest of the time. And my daddy was doing the same thing. And maybe that's why I was so sensitive to it, is because I'm like, you're dealing with something dark and personal, but it's changing your relationships with the people who love you. So when I was pregnant with Titus, so my second child, I had just lost his twin. My brother was living with us, and I was on bed rest. So my youngest brother was helping take care of me and all this stuff. And we get a call on Christmas Eve that our daddy had passed away. He had been in a vehicle driving, and they couldn't determine if he had had a heart attack or a stroke, but this had happened. So when we get the call, he hadn't died yet. He was in the hospital. This is what happened. So we get in the car and we start the 7-hour drive back home. And during that time, our daddy passed away. When we got here, everything my daddy had changed a lot of his like paperwork and stuff like that. So I was in charge of a lot of things, being the oldest sibling, and had to meet with his place of employment and talk to the hospital and talk to the funeral home. And I had to do all these things that as a 24-year-old, I was not prepared or equipped for. Also carrying a baby, also high risk pregnancy. Had my little girl who was dealing with some major medical issues that we were uncovering. And like I've told you before, I'm in therapy, and this thing is the thing that really kind of I still struggle with, because I was just in charge of so many things. And my daddy had written Christmas cards to all of us. And so my brothers and my sister opened their cards, and they're like talking about how proud he is of them, and just all these like positive things. And that were all appropriate, because they are awesome, and they are wonderful, and they worked really hard on their relationship with daddy. His card to me was basically like what a disappointment I was. And he assumed I was a good mom. He wouldn't know because I wasn't around him, and blah, 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 blah. So I had put some boundaries in place that he disagreed with. And it just really just kind of severed our relationship. And then he died. And so I was really angry. This is the season where that anger really came into play. And I had about 2 years of being really angry and hurt at my daddy, and not understanding I can't do anything about it because he's passed away. What do you do when there's this hurt and this unfinished business and the person's not here anymore? And then I focused on like, God, why did you allow this to happen? Why did you allow him to go before we could find resolve and reconciliation? And eventually I was willing to go to counseling and get help with that. And it took me a long time to be able to forgive my daddy, and ask God for forgiveness